Chapter 1. The Unexpected Summons. The Valerian homeworld hung like a gem in the deep reaches of space, its glowing silver-blue oceans and immense cities radiating with power. For generations, the Valerian Empire had dominated the stars, a vast civilization spanning hundreds of star systems. Their race was one of the most advanced in the known galaxy, their technology and military prowess unrivaled by any other. But beneath the veneer of power and strength, a shadow now loomed over their future, a problem so deep-rooted that it threatened to extinguish their royal line. Princess Zalara, heir to the Valerian throne, stood alone in her chamber, staring out across the vast city of Kale-Tor below. Her thoughts were troubled. A problem as old as her species weighed heavily on her mind. Reproduction. The Valerian race, despite all their advancements, had encountered a devastating issue: genetic degradation. Their bloodline was weakening, and with it, the strength that made them rulers of the stars. The royal family, in particular, faced extinction unless drastic measures were taken. Despite their efforts to prolong their reign, there had been no male offspring in the royal bloodline for nearly 3 generations. Geneticists had analyzed the problem in great detail, and their conclusions were undeniable. The Valerian blood had become too concentrated, too stagnant to produce the necessary diversity for strong, viable heirs. And now, Zalara faced a decision that could change the course of her people forever. The solution offered by the Royal Council was as controversial as it was radical. Introduce foreign genetic material into the royal line. The Council's research had led them to an unexpected source: humans. Their genetic diversity and adaptability made them an ideal candidate for hybridization. Among the humans, one man in particular had been chosen: Mark Ryder, a skilled engineer stationed on a distant outpost near the Kelder system. His record indicated not only a strong physical constitution, but also high intelligence and a reputation for quick thinking in dangerous situations. The council had already made their decision, and now it was up to Zalara to execute it. She had always prided herself on her strength, on her ability to command and lead. But this was different. It wasn't a negotiation, a battle, or a conquest. This was about survival, about her daughter Xena and Arya, who stood on the precipice of a future without the strength of their ancestors. And so, the summons was sent. Mark Ryder was no stranger to unexpected developments in his life, but this being summoned by the most powerful race in the galaxy was something else entirely. His life had been quiet up until that moment. As an engineer for a small, independent mining company, he spent most of his days tinkering with broken-down ships and equipment, keeping the mining operation in the Kelder system running smoothly. It was isolated work, but it suited him. He liked the quiet, the solitude, and the occasional long voyages between systems. When the official summons came through his communicator, he had been repairing a malfunctioning hyperdrive on one of the mining transports. The sudden blare of the message startled him, and he nearly dropped his tools. Wiping his hands on his jumpsuit, he pulled up the message on his wrist communicator. The emblem of the Valerian Empire appeared, followed by a formal, emotionless voice. Human Mark Ryder, you are hereby summoned by order of Princess Zalara of the Valerian Empire. You are required to appear before the royal court on Kale-Tor for a matter of urgent importance. Your cooperation is mandatory. Transportation will be provided. Mark blinked in confusion. Summoned? By the Valerian Empire? For what? His mind raced, trying to think of what could possibly have led to this. He had no dealings with the Valorians, at least, none that he knew of. They were an elite race, far above the affairs of independent miners like himself. Before he could fully process the message, a flash of light caught his eye from outside the small mining base. He hurried to the window and saw what could only be a Valerian battleship descending through the atmosphere, its sleek, silver form cutting through the clouds like a blade. Guess they weren't kidding about transportation, he muttered. In the hours that followed, Mark found himself aboard the Valerian vessel, being escorted by towering, silver-skinned soldiers. The battleship was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Its technology, so advanced that even the smallest details were a marvel of engineering. But Mark had little time to admire the ship as they prepared to enter hyperspace, heading straight for the Valerian homeworld. He had no idea what awaited him on Kale-Tor, but the thought of facing the Valerian royal family, the most powerful beings in the galaxy, was enough to make his stomach churn. Whatever this urgent matter was, he had the sinking feeling that it was going to change his life forever. Chapter 2. The princess's decree. Kael'tor was more magnificent than Mark could have ever imagined. As the Valerian battleship descended through the planet's atmosphere, he gazed out at the sprawling cities that stretched across the horizon, their gleaming towers reaching toward the sky. Rivers of light flowed through the streets, and massive skybridges connected the buildings, creating a futuristic metropolis that seemed to be in constant motion. The Valorians were known for their advanced technology and architectural brilliance, but seeing it in person was something else entirely. The battleship landed smoothly at the royal palace, a colossal structure made of shimmering crystal and metal that reflected the light in a dazzling array of colors. Mark was escorted from the ship by 2 Valerian guards, their silver armor gleaming in the sunlight. As they walked toward the entrance of the palace, Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. He had never seen anything like it. But as they approached the grand doors, his awe was quickly replaced by anxiety. What could they possibly want from him? Inside the palace, the halls were vast and ornate, with towering columns and intricate carvings depicting the history of the Valerian Empire. Mark's footsteps echoed through the marble corridors as the guards led him deeper into the heart of the palace. Finally, they stopped before a pair of massive doors that seemed to pulse with energy. One of the guards turned to Mark. "You will be presented before Princess Zalara. Speak only when spoken to and show the proper respect." Mark nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. The doors opened with a low hum, revealing a large throne room bathed in soft, blue light. At the far end of the room, seated on a throne of crystal, was Princess Zalara. She was as imposing as she was beautiful. Her silver skin glistened under the light, and her dark, flowing hair framed a face that was both regal and stern. Her eyes, a deep shade of violet, seemed to pierce through him as she regarded him from her throne. Standing beside her were 2 younger Valerian women, both equally striking in appearance. Mark could only assume they were her daughters, Xena and Arya. Mark's heart raced as he was led forward, stopping a few feet from the throne. He bowed awkwardly, unsure of the proper etiquette. "Human," Zalara's voice was calm but commanding. "You have been summoned here because we face a crisis that threatens the future of the Valerian Empire." Mark straightened, his confusion growing. "A crisis?" Zalara nodded. "For generations, our bloodline has been weakening. We are no longer able to produce male heirs to continue the royal line. Our geneticists have determined that the only way to strengthen our blood is to introduce new genetic material." Yours? Mark blinked, stunned. "Mine?" "Yes," Zalara said, her gaze unwavering. "You have been chosen for your genetic compatibility with the Valerian royal family. Your task will be to provide offspring with my daughters, Xena and Arya, to ensure the continuation of our bloodline." The room fell silent. Mark's mind reeled as he tried to process what he had just heard. They wanted him to reproduce with the Valerian princesses? His heart pounded in his chest as he struggled to find words. Wait a minute," he stammered. "You're asking me to ensure the survival of our race," Zalara interrupted, her tone firm. "This is not a request. It is a royal decree. You will comply, or you will face the consequences." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. This was insane. How could they expect him to just go along with this? But as he looked into Zalara's eyes, he realized that he had no choice. The Valorians were not a people to be trifled with, and refusing a royal decree would likely mean his death or worse. Before he could respond, Xena stepped forward, her violet eyes locking onto his. "Do not be afraid, human," she said softly. "This is an honor. You will be remembered as the one who saved the Valerian Empire." Arya, who had remained silent until now, nodded in agreement. "Our people need you. You have the chance to be a part of something greater than yourself." Mark swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had come here expecting, well, he didn't know what he had expected, but it certainly wasn't this. And yet, as he stood there, surrounded by the towering Valorians, he realized that his life would never be the same. Chapter 2. The Princess's Decree. Mark could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he stood before the imposing figure of Princess Zalara, the ruler of one of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. The towering Valerian throne room, bathed in shimmering blue light, seemed to hum with an energy that only heightened his anxiety. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation, but the words spoken by the princess moments ago still rang in his ears. Your task will be to provide offspring with my daughters, Xena and Arya, to ensure the continuation of our bloodline. He couldn't believe it. It was absurd. They wanted him to know, commanded him to help them solve some kind of royal succession crisis by fathering children with their princesses. The entire concept was incomprehensible, like something out of a bizarre science fiction novel. He stared at the regal figure of Princess Solara, her violet eyes steady and unwavering as she awaited his response. "Wait," Mark stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're asking me to reproduce with your daughters?" Princess Solara, seated on her gleaming crystal throne, gave a single, solemn nod. Her silver skin glistened under the soft lights of the throne room, her dark hair falling in sharp contrast against her regal features. She exuded an air of command, but there was no cruelty in her gaze, just necessity. Her daughters, Xena and Arya, stood by her side, their expressions calm but unreadable. "This is not a request, human," Solara said, her voice firm but not unkind. "It is a decree. The future of our empire depends on your cooperation." Mark blinked, his mind still reeling. "But why me? I'm just a mechanic. There must be thousands, no, millions of humans out there better suited for whatever it is you need." Zalara's gaze remained steady. "Your profession is irrelevant. What matters is your genetic composition. We have studied the human race for generations, and our scientists have determined that your particular genetic profile offers the greatest compatibility with Valerian physiology. You possess qualities resilience, adaptability, and unpredictability that our species needs to reinvigorate our bloodline." "Unpredictability?" Mark muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "I'm just a guy who fixes things." Xena, the older of the two princesses, took a step forward. Her violet eyes, the same striking color as her mother's, locked onto Mark's. "Your humility is noted," she said softly, though there was a hint of something else in her tone, perhaps sympathy. "But our scientists have determined that you are uniquely suited for this task. The strength of our people depends on it." Mark's gaze shifted between Zalara and her daughters, his mind racing. He felt like he had been dropped into some kind of galactic nightmare, a twisted game where he was nothing more than a pawn. But the look in Zalara's eyes told him that this was no game. The survival of the Valerian Empire truly did rest on this strange and uncomfortable mission. "You expect me to just go along with this?" Mark finally asked, his voice filled with incredulity. "You can't just order someone to do something like this." Arya, the younger princess, who had been silent up until now, stepped forward. Her expression was more stoic, her sharp features mirroring her mother's regal bearing. "We understand that this situation is not what you expected, human," she said, her voice calm and measured. "But you must also understand that we are at a critical juncture. Our bloodline has weakened. We cannot produce male heirs, and without fresh genetic material, our entire civilization will collapse." Mark's throat tightened as the gravity of the situation began to sink in. The Valorians were powerful, one of the most advanced and feared empires in the galaxy. But beneath their imposing strength, there was a vulnerability that no one outside their inner circle had ever seen. Their genetic pool was faltering, and without an infusion of new blood, their reign could crumble. Zalara stood from her throne, her towering figure casting a long shadow across the room. She walked toward Mark with slow, deliberate steps, her presence commanding and regal. "This is not merely about survival," she said, her voice softer now but no less firm. "This is about preserving the future of our people. Without heirs to carry on the royal line, the stability of the Valerian Empire will shatter. Our enemies will sense weakness, and the galaxy will descend into chaos." Mark swallowed hard, the enormity of the situation pressing down on him. He had come to the Valerian homeworld with no idea of what awaited him, but now, he realized he was standing at the heart of a crisis that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. And he was the key to preventing that collapse. "I understand what you're saying," Mark said slowly, his voice tight. "But I'm not sure I can just go along with this. I mean, I'm not a breeder. This isn't what I signed up for." Zalara's expression softened, and for the first time since he had arrived, Mark saw a flicker of something human, something vulnerable in her eyes. "We are not asking you to abandon your humanity," she said gently. "We are asking you to join us in securing the future. You will be treated with the utmost respect, and your role in saving our people will be honored for generations to come. Xena stepped closer to him, her gaze unwavering. This is not a simple request, we understand, but you will not be alone in this. You will be given every comfort, every resource to ensure that this mission succeeds. We will guide you through the process. Mark stood there, torn between his instinct to flee and the realization that there was nowhere to run. The Valorians were too powerful, their reach too vast. Even if he managed to escape, they would find him. And what then? He would spend the rest of his life on the run, hunted by the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. You must understand, Arya added, her voice softer now. This is not just about duty. It's about survival. Without you, our future will die. Mark's shoulders slumped as the weight of their words sank in. There was no way out of this. Whether he liked it or not, he had been thrust into a situation that was beyond his control. He looked up at Zalara, Xena, and Arya, all of them waiting for his response, their expressions a mix of expectation and hope. "All right," Mark said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. "I'll do it. I'll help you." Princess Zalara gave a single nod, her expression unreadable. "You have made a wise decision, Mark Ryder. The future of the Valerian Empire now rests in your hands." And with that, Mark's life changed forever. Chapter 3. The Daughter's Dilemma. The days following Mark's reluctant acceptance were nothing short of surreal. The Valerian Palace was a marvel of advanced engineering, combining ancient grandeur with technology beyond human comprehension. Mark was given a suite within the palace walls that was larger than any apartment he had ever known back on Earth. It was furnished with sleek, crystalline structures, floating furniture, and a bed that adjusted to his every movement. Despite the luxury, he found it hard to relax. Every time he closed his eyes, the weight of his new reality came crashing down on him. He had been chosen to father the future rulers of the Valerian Empire. Him, Mark Ryder, a simple mechanic from a backwater mining outpost, now held the fate of an entire civilization in his hands. The pressure was overwhelming, and yet he felt as though he were drifting through it all, caught in a current he couldn't escape. To their credit, Xena and Arya were not the cold, distant royals he had expected. The sisters, despite their intimidating presence, made an effort to engage with him and ease the tension between them. Xena, the older sister, was more empathetic. She seemed to sense his discomfort and tried to bridge the gap between their worlds. Arya, on the other hand, was more analytical and logical, approaching their situation as though it were a carefully orchestrated plan that needed precise execution. It was clear that both sisters carried the weight of their people's expectations on their shoulders, just as much as Mark now did. One evening, several days after his arrival, Mark found himself seated in a small but elegant chamber. A large window overlooked the glowing city of Kael'tor, its silver spires shimmering under the evening light. Xena and Arya sat across from him, their expressions calm but their eyes betraying their own internal struggles. "We wanted to speak with you," Xena said, her voice soft but carrying the regal tone of someone who had been trained from birth to lead. "We understand that this has been difficult for you." Mark leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "Difficult doesn't even begin to cover it. I feel like I've been thrown into something I can't control." Xena nodded, her gaze empathetic. "Believe me, we understand. This isn't easy for us either. We never imagined that our people's future would come to this relying on an outsider. But we have no choice. The genetic degradation in our race has reached a critical point. Without new blood, we will face extinction." Mark sighed. "I get that, but I'm just a guy. Why me? Why not someone else? Surely, there are other humans out there who could dash." "You were chosen because of your genetic profile," Arya interrupted, her voice precise and factual. "We have been studying human genetics for centuries. Our scientists have identified certain traits in your DNA that make you the ideal candidate for hybridization with our species. It's not just about strength or intelligence, it's about adaptability. Your resilience is something our people lack." Mark frowned, feeling a bit like a lab experiment. "So, I'm just a genetic resource to you?" Xena shook her head quickly. "No, that's not how we see it. We know this is unorthodox, to say the least. But we are asking for more than just your DNA. We are asking for your partnership. This isn't just about producing heirs, it's about building a future together." Mark looked between the two sisters, trying to gauge their sincerity. He had expected them to be cold, calculating royalty figures who saw him as nothing more than a tool to be used. But there was something genuine in their words, especially from Xena. Despite the circumstances, he couldn't help but feel that they, too, were trapped in a situation beyond their control. Arya leaned forward slightly, her analytical gaze softening. "We know this is a lot to ask of you, but we are not without honor. You will be treated with the utmost respect, and your role in securing the future of the Valerian Empire will be remembered for generations. You will be celebrated." Mark let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. Celebrated? For what? Being the guy who had kids with the Valerian princesses? Xena smiled slightly, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "It's more than that. You're helping to preserve our entire civilization. Our people will not forget what you've done. You will be remembered as a hero." "A hero?" Mark repeated, his tone laced with skepticism. He wasn't sure how he felt about that. Back on Earth, he was just a mechanic. He'd never sought fame or glory, he just wanted a quiet, simple life. And now, he was being thrust into the role of some kind of galactic savior. The room fell silent for a moment as Mark processed everything. Xena and Arya watched him closely, their expressions unreadable. Finally, Mark sighed and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I still don't know how I feel about all of this," he admitted, "but I'm starting to understand the bigger picture. You're not just asking me to father children, you're asking me to help save your people." Xena nodded, her eyes earnest. "Exactly. And we know that this is asking a lot of you. But we don't have any other options. Our people are depending on us." Mark rubbed his face with his hands, feeling the weight of it all. I never imagined I'd be in this position." Arya spoke again, her tone more gentle than before. "None of us did. But fate has brought us here, and now we must make the best of it. Together." The room fell silent once more, the tension lingering in the air. Mark looked up at the two princesses, his mind still swirling with doubts and uncertainties. But one thing was becoming clear: this wasn't just about him. This was about an entire race of people, and their future was now tied to his. "So," Mark said slowly, "what happens next?" Xena exchanged a glance with Arya before turning back to him. "There will be preparations. Our scientists will guide the process to ensure the best possible outcome. But before that, we want to make sure you're comfortable with everything." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Comfortable? That's one way to put it." Xena smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "We don't want you to feel like a prisoner here. We want you to understand that you are a part of something greater than any of us." Arya nodded in agreement. "You will have time to adjust, and we will be by your side throughout this process. You are not alone in this." Mark sat back in his chair, staring out the window at the vast, gleaming city beyond. The Valerian Empire stretched out before him, a testament to their power and influence. And now, he was being asked to help ensure that this empire survived for generations to come. For better or worse, he was in this now, and there was no turning back. Chapter 4. A New Future. The days stretched into weeks, and Mark found himself slowly acclimating to the strange reality he had been thrust into. His suite within the Valerian Palace became both his sanctuary and his prison, a place where he could reflect on the enormity of his role in their empire's future. The days were a blur of meetings with Valerian geneticists and scholars, each explaining in detail the intricate process that would eventually lead to the birth of the next generation of Valerian royalty. It was all so scientific, so clinical, and yet, it couldn't mask the fundamental truth. He was here to father children with Xena and Arya. The sisters were patient, to their credit. Despite the weight of their own responsibilities, they made an effort to treat Mark not as a pawn in their genetic chess game, but as a partner. Xena, the more empathetic of the two, often spent time talking with Mark, sharing stories of Valerian history and the Empire's many conquests. She seemed to understand that Mark needed time to adjust, and she never pressured him to accept his role too quickly. Arya, on the other hand, approached the situation with her usual calculated logic. She wasn't cold, exactly, but there was a distinct air of detachment in the way she spoke about their arrangement. To her, this was a mission, a task that needed to be completed to ensure the survival of their race. She respected Mark's autonomy, but it was clear that she was focused on the larger goal, ensuring that their union produced the strongest offspring possible. One evening, Mark sat on the balcony of his suite, staring out at the city of Kael'tor as the twin moons rose over the horizon. The view was breathtaking, and yet, he couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over him since his arrival. He had agreed to this to be part of their plan, but doubts still gnawed at the edges of his mind. What kind of life would he be bringing into the galaxy? What would become of him after this was all over? Would he return to Earth, forever known as the man who fathered the future rulers of the Valerian Empire? He was lost in thought when he heard the soft footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Xena standing in the doorway, her long silver hair catching the light from the moons. She looked different tonight, less like the princess she was, and more like someone burdened by the weight of an uncertain future. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice gentle. Mark gestured to the empty seat beside him. "Of course." Xena sat down, her gaze drifting out over the city. For a few moments, neither of them spoke, the silence between them stretching comfortably. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "About what all of this means. About the future." Mark glanced at her, surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. "I thought you and Arya had everything figured out. You seemed so sure of what you were doing." Xena smiled, but it was a sad smile. "We've always been taught to be sure, to know our purpose. As members of the royal family, we're raised with the understanding that our lives aren't really our own. We belong to the Empire, to the people. Every decision we make is about ensuring the future of our civilization." Mark nodded slowly. He could understand that, to some extent. His own life had been one of duty, though on a much smaller scale. He had always taken pride in his work as an engineer, knowing that the ships he repaired helped keep the mining colonies running smoothly. But this what Xena and Arya were dealing with was on a whole different level. They weren't just ensuring the survival of a small operation. They were trying to save an entire race from extinction. "I guess I didn't really think about it that way," Mark admitted. "I was so focused on how strange this all felt for me. I didn't stop to think about how hard this must be for you." Xena shook her head. "It's not easy for any of us. But we've learned to carry it, because we have to. If we don't, the Valerian Empire will crumble, and everything our ancestors built will be lost. That's a burden I'm willing to bear." Mark looked at her, seeing the depth of her resolve for the first time. Xena wasn't just a princess going through the motions of duty, she was a leader, a woman who understood the gravity of her position and the sacrifices it required. And yet, there was still a part of her that longed for something more, something beyond the expectations placed on her. "I think I'm starting to get it," Mark said after a long pause. "Why this is so important to you. It's more than just about survival, it's about the future you want to create." Xena nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Exactly. It's not just about continuing the bloodline, it's about ensuring that our people have a future worth living for. That's why we need you, Mark. You bring something to the table that we can't provide ourselves. Your resilience, your adaptability, it's what will make the next generation stronger." Mark leaned back in his chair, taking in her words. He had spent so much time focusing on the strangeness of the situation that he had failed to see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about producing heirs, it was about shaping the future of an empire. And for all the pressure that came with it, there was also a strange kind of honor in being asked to help with something so monumental. "I think I'm finally starting to see where I fit in all of this," Mark said quietly. "And while I'm still not sure I fully understand everything, I want to help. I want to be a part of this." Xena turned to him, her eyes softening. "Thank you, Mark. That means more than you know." For the first time since his arrival on Kael'tor, Mark felt a sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't perfect, there were still many questions, many uncertainties, but at least now, he felt like he was moving forward with purpose. The following weeks passed in a blur of preparations. The Valerian scientists were meticulous in their work, ensuring that every step of the genetic process was carefully monitored. Mark spent hours in consultations with the royal family's geneticists, who explained the intricacies of hybridization and the importance of ensuring the healthiest possible offspring. It was strange to think of the future children in such scientific terms, but the Valorians left nothing to chance. Throughout it all, Xena and Arya remained by his side. They had gone from distant princesses to partners in this strange mission, and over time, the initial awkwardness between them began to fade. They spoke of the future, of the hopes they had for their people, and of the children they would eventually bring into the world. What had once seemed like an impossible, surreal situation was now becoming something tangible, something real. As the preparations came to a close, Mark stood on the balcony of his suite once more, gazing out at the city as the twin moons rose into the sky. Xena and Arya joined him, standing on either side as they looked out at the future that awaited them. "We're ready," Xena said softly, her voice filled with quiet determination. Mark nodded, his heart steady for the first time in weeks. "So am I." Together, they stood in silence, gazing out at the stars above. The weight of the galaxy rested on their shoulders, but for the first time, Mark felt like he was ready to face it. The future was theirs to create, and for better or worse, they would shape it together.